Hi and welcome to this tutorial. We've used the application context in our program in order to initialize the Spring container, and we've used an XML file in order to configure it. We have done this only once in our entire application, and we do a get bean only once, and then the related beans to this bean that we're trying to get has been automatically populated by Spring. So the triangle, even though it needs these three objects over here, it does not do a get bean because Spring automatically populates it depending on our configuration in our Spring XML. Now, normally you would not need to do a get bean anywhere else. Just doing in the at the start will initialize the container and you're done. But there are some situations where you would want to use this context that we have initialized here. You would want to use this and you want to provide access to that context to a bean, for example. Now, let's say the triangle bean that I have here needs the context that we have initialized here in order to do a get bean. Let's say instead of configuring the wiring of the triangle object to these points in the XML file, I want to do a get bean of point A, B, and C. Now, why would I want to do that? I'll give you a simple scenario. There are, of course, many reasons why you'd want to have access to application context, though it's bad practice because you're going to bind your code to Spring, but the application context itself provides a lot of features that we haven't seen yet, and you might want to use those features. But I'm going to give you a simple example why you'd want to use a application context get bean in your bean instead of directly wiring them up in the Spring XML. Now, let's say I've defined this triangle object as a singleton. So what's going to happen is Spring is going to create this triangle object when the container is loading, and it's not going to create any new instances. Now let's say the dependents, the beans that the triangle object is dependent on, if they happen to be prototypes, and let's say I want these beans to be created newly every time, that will not work because the dependencies of the triangle will also be satisfied when the triangle object is created. Now, since triangle is a singleton, points A, B, and C will also be created along with the triangle, which is when the container loads, and they will be initialized. So even though these points happen to be prototypes, even though I define points A, B, and C as prototypes in my spring.xml, they will be initialized only once because the parent triangle is initialized only once, since it happens to be a singleton. Now, if I want to create new instances of point A, B, and C whenever I need it in the code, then one way to do this is by using the context.getBean, and then I can call the point A, B, or C and then get a new point A, B, or C if I have defined this as a prototype. So that is one reason why you'd want to have access to the application context, and I'll show you in this tutorial how we can actually get access to the application context, and then the usage. There are different usage scenarios, and we won't cover that, but we'll just have a look at how we can get the context in the first place. So this is the context that we need to get. Note that it's initialized only once, it's passed the Spring XML configuration only once, but then you can get the same context object, a reference to the same context object using this method. So in order to get the application context, we need to implement an interface called ApplicationContextAware. So if any bean implements this interface, then this bean can become aware of this application context. It can use this. Now, of course, I'll have to import this. This is in the Spring Framework.context package. Now, if I implement this, I will have to implement a method. Now, if I add the unimplemented methods here, I will get a method called setApplicationContext, and this is giving me an application context. Now let me call this context. Okay, so now what I will do is I can capture this application context over here. Now I can have a context member variable, and I can capture this application context. So what I'm going to do is I'll create a member variable here, private application context, I'll initialize it to null, and then here in my setter, when I get the context, what I can do is I can do a this dot context equals context. Now what's going to happen is it's going to set the member variable to the context that Spring is going to provide. So what Spring does is when it loads all the beans, be it a singleton or a prototype, when it sees that any bean implements this application context aware, then Spring is going to call the set application context, and it's going to pass the application context to this method. So we can capture this context and save it as our member variable so that it's accessible from anywhere. So say I have another method here, I can do a context.getBean and I can initialize it. So it could be as simple as getting my member variables using getBeans instead of using the Spring default wiring. So this way it's pretty handy. So just like the application context aware, there are a few other aware interfaces which gives information about the container to your bean, and what you need to do to get such information is to implement the correct interface, and then implementing the interface will mean you have to have a setter method, and Spring is going to automatically pass that information in the setter method. So we have interfaces like application event publisher aware, we have bean class loader aware, and things like that. I'll show you one other aware interface which is called as the bean name aware. So you would want to use this if you want to know what is the name of the bean that has been configured in the spring.xml. Now we know that triangle has been configured as triangle itself, but in order to get the name, what we can do is we can implement this bean name aware. So we need to do the import as well as implement the methods. So it's going to be just one method. If you say add unimplemented methods, it's going to give you with a setter again. So you will get the name of the bean as the parameter. So I'll call this bean name, and here I can have a member variable, and then I can print out the bean name. I'll just print out a bean name just to demonstrate. Bean name is, and I'll add the bean name. So here you can use some code. You can set a member variable and then you can use it anywhere in the bean in this class. But just for demonstration purpose, I'm just going to do a system.print. Now if we run the drawing application, we're going to get the bean name, and the bean name has been set to triangle. Note that I have printed in the setter itself. So what it's actually doing is it's actually making this call to the set bean name before the code executes. So we saw that the print statement for the bean name was displayed before the program executed, before we called the draw method. So while initializing the bean itself, Spring is going to automatically call the right setters depending on the interfaces, the aware interfaces that you implement. So this can be done for any number of beans in your Spring XML. As long as the bean implements these interfaces, Spring is going to look for all the beans that implement any of these aware interfaces, and it's going to call the setters, and it's going to pass the value that you actually want, and then you can do what you want with that value. You can have it as a member variable, or you can use it in the execution, but you can have access to those values if you want.